Thanks for checking out this highlight from the Casually Hardcore podcast. If you want to check out the full podcast after the show, please be sure to hit the top link in the description. But now, let's do it. Yeah, he's gonna get it. Let him get the box. So we've been covering this game for a long time, well over 10 years. But now here we are. There's the OG box, dude. The collector's edition. You got your your little birth certificate thing that they did, and yeah, I still have that too. I also have the little book for that taking notes.
The birth certificate you had to send away for, remember?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
I still have it. That's upstairs. It's framed. I'm a dork. Whatever.
Do you have your name in the credits? Are you a legacy, considered legacy?
No, because I actually unsubbed from it when right before they made the subs free.
Yeah.
Or no, I'm sorry. When they resubbed, when they put the sub back in, I did not sub, so I'm not in the legacy credits on 2.0.
Do you regret that at all now?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I'm like, shit. If I would have just given you $45 over 3 months, yeah, I do regret
it was
that.
A gamble. It was a gamble.
Also made me ineligible for the
That's an apology
amount too.
So just know that tattoo, that discounted sub, is an apology.
Yeah.
That is not. At the time, that was not like, these people made a good decision. They deserve a reward.
We made terrible decisions.
So sorry.
Look at that art.
Dude,
that is beautiful.
Oh, gosh, man. You know, 1.0 destroyed my PC. It ran so hard and so hot on that machine trying to render those flower pots. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, the flower pots in 1.0 were given the same level of code and care as a player character. You know, so those flower pots look good. But it's like, yeah, the thing, like, you needed a beast of a machine back in the day, and probably still to this day, to render the game. And there was really nothing happening in it. But now, here we are a decade later, and we're heading into an insane expansion. I think we're about to experience something that will hope, like, if it lands, which I expect it will like be something that people just remember this saga and like remember when we played through all of 14, etc. So let's go ahead and just focus in on a conversation, spoiler free as best as possible, talking about 5.5 impressions. Mike, is this an expansion for you? Like was this patch everything you wanted it to be? Did it live up to the hype, or is it disappointing you in any way?
We did all this on the Relic grind yesterday, so yeah, I'll
sub to his channel in the highlight, guys.
I'll truncate my opinions here, but you can check out if you want fuller versions. Honestly, 5.5 did not do anything I didn't expect it to do. Like, I fully expected what we got, but in a vacuum, comparing it to other .5s or other patches, I was a little disappointed in this one. That's not to say I didn't enjoy the story. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy the setup for a lot of stuff that we're, assuming we'll be doing, or guessing or speculating on what we'll be doing. I did enjoy the patch tremendously. I was a little disappointed just because I felt like we didn't progress much. Like, there was more focus on keeping things hidden and mysterious than there was on actually moving the story forward. It almost feels like, hey, we needed a little bit of story to get us to .55.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring Tiamat back. We'll fight Lunar Bahamut and do this thing. Sure, put that in there real quick. Like, we didn't progress anything. Now, maybe those characters will play out in 5.5 or 6.0 a little more. That's great. It just felt like we were kind of stationary. We didn't really accomplish anything. It was wonderful to do it. It was the dungeon. We'll get to that, I'm sure, in a little bit, and because I have some opinions on that. But yeah, a little disappointing because I felt like they were so focused on not revealing anything that nothing got revealed at all. And we just kind of stayed stationary. I gave it like a 7 out of 10 as far as like the main story quest and stuff. It did what I expected it to do, but there's still that fanboy part of me that give me a little bit, tease me a little bit. Don't just block the weapon that Xenos picks up. Show me a little piece of it or something. Just give me something to start speculating.
Especially since it's only a couple more weeks.
Yeah.
Because then we could still speculate on what is it called and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But but it's like, are they going to show it? Like, how cool would it have been if they actually showed the weapon and just people are just going nuts? It's like, oh my gosh. And then Yoshi P comes out and can really clarifies like what it is and like how it plays, etc.
Could have dragged it on to
creatively
pick
and
up a couple.
safely. By the way, there is no weapon in that scene. if you watch that cutscene. People have data mined that scene in particular, and there's a pillar in the camera shot that presumably blocks you from seeing the weapon that he draws.
Yeah.
There actually is not a weapon behind there. So like they tried to data mine it and couldn't even do that.
Chris,
I would give it a 7 out of 10 as well. But execution is where I'd knock the 3 points, not the amount of stuff. I think the dungeon tried to tackle too much for a dungeon. That should have been a trial fight. The lore-wise behind that dungeon, it's too much stuff to cram into a dungeon. It's too big of a subject. Any of you that watched the last season of Game of Thrones, sometimes things just need more time. We spent a long time building up to this, at least in calendar days, to just see it resolve over the course of a dungeon that does not have a harder difficulty, over content that does not have the ability to have an additional phase added, have, something. Great dungeon. The ocean fishing content. It's good. I wanted something a little bit more. The celebration content, the Skyrise celebrations. It's good, but then they made the drop rates on the lockboxes so quick that when you do it once, you don't really have a reason to keep coming back and doing it over and over and over and over. And they could have reused some of the previous Fate Firmament building events and had us go around and let's maintain these buildings. So they could have had more to it. It's delightful. Everybody should do it once. There's not really a reason to keep coming back time and time again. I think in general, it's just like I wanted a little bit more with the gold mounts. The whole purpose of the gold mounts was to pull money out of the economy, and they set the most expensive one at 50 million. And I know to new players that are like, I've never had more than 100,000. That's an insane number. But to people who've been playing since 4.0, 3.0, 2.0, there were people who bought them both on day one.
Yep. There's and your gold guides, tremendous stuff, by the way. Those still hold up to this day, by the way. If you need gold in Final Fantasy, I know they were made a while ago, but they still hold up. Go.
The only reason why Chris doesn't have more gil is because it's just a process that you do.
Yeah.
And it's like, and the thing is, like I've said, I haven't done it because I have never needed gil. And that's one of the things that, like, with gil and experience, like I harken back to like those two principles. It needs more value. And if it does have more value, now there's also the counterpart where the more valuable you make gil, the more incentive that you're having with gil sellers and people, real money trading, because all of a sudden that has a massive like influx. So there's a balance there, right? You can't sit here and say, everything is take gil and we're gonna make it, just because otherwise you end up having rapid inflation, and then that new player coming in being like, well, I just want to buy a basic weapon. They're like, it's 100,000 gil. What? It's like, you should have been here 10 years ago, dumbass. Like, let's go.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and if you're walking around with 100 or 200,000, then please go watch Chris's guides. A lot of them you don't even have to have crafting and stuff. So just for God's sakes, go check them out. But there is a huge, if you don't understand these syncs being necessary, Chris and Brian, I'm sure you guys know, there is a huge percentage of the audience like us that is, when we're sitting at 10 or 12 million gil, we're like, oh, I'm broke. I
don't do anything about it. I just stay at 10.
Right. But there is a big port. They needed something. But I agree. I think they should have been priced a little higher. I think they should have been a little more.
I think this is a starting point. I think I'm fine with them starting with this, as long as this is not another Eggy Glamour situation. As long as every patch they're like new mounts, glamour mounts. Like if they
Golden
have that
Pony.
Golden Pony,
Golden Dogo.
So if every patch that they're adding, then essentially you get this this increasing obviously canter of different thing, and hopefully we see minions. Hopefully we see like all kinds of stuff. Like hell,
and
give me
unique ones behind the metas. Once you have 10 of them, there's a unique mount. This mount only comes in gilded.
I don't care about mounts. Like I only have like 50 or 60 mounts, but minions. Oh, you give me gold minions.
That golden koala. Can you imagine it shooting gold off your shoulder?
I don't know what it is about minions in this game, man. Since day one, I think I'm at like 340 or just under 340. I freaking love minions.
So I just started putting them in macros so that when I change classes, it changes which minions out. Oh, now I get to pair each job with a minion of its choosing, and that's made it delightful.
The other thing
so you put in your macro, then based on the glamour, because the koala doesn't look good with my pig suit because it sticks through the pig. So I was like, where do I use this? So it's on my white mage. So now my white mage running around as a chicken has a koala on its shoulder, which is
so
fantastic.
back in the day in Final Fantasy XI, maining red mages, I had macros for spells to change equipment.
Yes.
Because of the staffs, the elemental
same
staves,
thing.
and all
Black
that
mage
stuff.
right here. Yeah.
Now it's just like macros for minions, baby. Macros for minions for days. Let's do it. 336.
How cool would it be if they actually fixed like the macro system so that you could use it in combat without suffering DPS loss? You start macroing like attacks that have minions that are tied to it. It's like, all right, Chris is in his golden like chocobo phase. Like,
do you know what I want? If we're just gonna add one thing to macros that won't change the battle system at all, I want magic prisms to be able to be placed in macros. Those things have no value. But if every time I cast a limit break, I shoot a sparkly Easter egg over my head, I am about to buy a lot of magic prisms.
The magic prism market, like to the moon.
For a game that's already like should almost have a seizure warning with full settings on. Like I cannot do combat. New players are like, I have my settings turned up, and how do you beat encounters? Turn your settings down. Like, stop looking at every sparkly thing that someone else casts. But if you can let me start tossing sparkly things out every time I land a combo, it's like, oh, inner release. Here comes, House of whatever.
I'm so glad. I have 2 macros. Yeah, and Chris is right, by the way. If you don't, I have 2 macros to whether I'm in a party or not in a party that shut everything off or turn everything on. So definitely shut that stuff down. Otherwise, Chris is going to get his wish and you're going to be blinded and won't see a damn thing.
Chris can't have more than 100,000 gil. I know, and I'm making 2 million a day. It's just magic prisms. Every Eden pull. I'm using no consumables to increase my stats, and these things are costing me 5,000 a pull.
Oh, that's too funny. Let's talk about the dungeon. So 5.5, obviously the final dungeon. And I agree. Like honestly, it's interesting to have that here because it's gonna feel like 5.5. Like okay, like what's the big piece of content that's connected to it? But what do you think of the dungeon, Magic?
Okay.
Peggle.
So yeah. I am very, very big on dungeon content, whether it be Final Fantasy, whether it be World of Warcraft, Guild Wars. I love dungeon content. I love raiding and 8-person and 24-person and 15-person and 25, whatever game you want to do. But I really, really enjoy dungeon content. I think Final Fantasy does it very well, but I've also constantly said, whether it's on my own shows or on State of the Realm with Haps, it is also the area that I see for the biggest amount of improvement and opportunity in Final Fantasy. I liked this dungeon a lot from a cinematic and story standpoint. I thought it fit the main story quest tremendously well.
Mm-hmm.
It actually felt like we were there for main story reasons, where if you look back at just even one patch back at Matoya's Relic, that dungeon felt like, we need a dungeon for the patch. Let's say Matoya needs something from a building in the north and have people go get that thing. And there's our dungeon. Where this one I felt was very narrative driven with Tiamat flying around and stuff like that. I loved it from that perspective. I can't stand, and Final Fantasy isn't the only one that does this, obviously. I can't stand the hallway approach that we have with dungeons and have for a long time. Where it is straight line, boss, straight line, boss, straight line, boss. The first time I queued up for this dungeon, the very first time, it was already with 4 people that had not done it before. It was already grab everything, pull it to the boss, burn it down as far as it'll let you do it.
Right.
And really, in this dungeon, we only had one break point where you had to make multiple pulls between the second and the third boss.
I don't think we'd stopped at all. I nearly died.
Well, yeah, in the second, and the only break you have is between the second and the third boss because of the dragon flight.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have to do that in two separate pools. Which, by the way, the dragon flight, I was like, oh, we're gonna do something different. This is gonna be so cool.
I was really excited.
We mounted up, and I'm like, cool. Do I get to air bomb baddies on the way to the boss? Is there gonna be some new mechanic here? It's not gonna be earth shattering, but it'll show me that Square's thinking in this different direction. It was a very beautiful flight. The field was beautiful to look at.
Gorgeous.
The tower in the distance was gorgeous. There was no turbulence. The in-flight meal and movie were fantastic. But yeah, it's just a flight, so it was a little sad. The dungeon cinematically again totally does it for me. I really want to see evolution in the dungeons, and again, I know Final Fantasy isn't the only one guilty of this, but just think back. We have done different things. Like in the original Realm Reborn stuff.
Yep.
You know, Hawk Manor was such a unique go through and figure things out and go this way, and then let's jump back to the beginning. And Matoya's Relic, I thought they could have done a little something there. It wouldn't have been much, but it would have been something where after you beat it the first time, I thought, why not open those 3 corridors in any order you want to go?
Yeah.
Like narrative wise, you want me to go through it this way first, fine. But no, it plays in the exact same way. So I love dungeons, but it's the biggest area of opportunity. This one was beautiful and cinematically very, very good and meshed with the MSQ, but ultimately falls flat for me because it's still more of the same straight line boss.
I think that there's an opportunity there for things like limited jobs to add something on. If they don't want to make inventions, you could have a side wing, and the only reason to go down there is to learn a spell. And so I think you could go nest job quests in there and have to go through with a trust to do those. You could go reuse them from a couple different angles and still keep the core experience, this straight hallway. The flight, I remember getting on that flight and going, okay, we just had in-dungeon voice acting, and I'm getting on a dragon. I see you, WoW. Like, I'm looking straight at you, World of Warcraft. Bring it on. You give me a Mythic Plus version of this, and we are there. I think a lot of what's made Matoya's and this my favorite dungeons this expansion is that this expansion has been a retooling of my expectation of what a dungeon is. I came into this expansion expecting dungeons to be like they were in Stormblood, which was me hoping they were like they were in Heavensward. And what it's been is, thanks to the fact that I play tank, I now have a button that handles my enmity. And so it's how fast can I pull? And the answer is 2 or 3 before there's a door that stops me. And so as soon as you're comfortable with double and triple pulls, it was like, oh, so this is just a race. So the early dungeons were wonderful dungeons. There was a balance beam mechanic. There was all sorts of fun things. But because I was having to retool my expectations to dungeons are just speed, double, triple pull, door opens, boss, speed, double, triple pull, door opens, boss. Because there was no mechanical difficulty whatsoever, which was done to invite casual beginners into the game, which is wonderful. But because there was no second half to that, I've spent the entire expansion changing my expectations. And what I expected was a beautiful series of double, triple pulls followed by bosses. And as my expectations have changed, the dungeons have gotten better not because the dungeon, I mean, it's been one recipe this entire expansion, but because of what I have wanted from them has dropped so low. It dropped 505 and we've been sitting in 510 gear. I don't have a reason to run it again unless I'm going to run the expert roulette. So that was it.
So chat's saying side bosses for chances at emotes and orchestra and rolls. My question to y'all, go ahead.
That's something I brought up. Like if you've played WoW, and not to, I'm just comparing it to that one, not for any particular reason, but anybody remember Shadow Labyrinth, the Anzu boss? You know, totally optional boss. You needed to have an item from a totally different place in the world, and somebody in the party
had to be a druid.
Through, hey, does anybody have? Yeah.
Had to be a druid at first.
Had to be a druid, for the class stuff. You know, hey, does anybody have this so we could pull this optional extra boss that had a chance to drop a mount? Just stuff like that. It's very small. Like, you wouldn't think that is that enough to get you, Mike? Jesus, because they put a 4th boss in it. You're very happy? No, they put a 4th optional boss that sometimes I'm going to get to do, sometimes I'm not. Or drops a very cool thing. So me and Brian and Chris, we're going to farm it today. You know, we're going to keep beating up that. Those little tweaks just add so much replayability to content that, Chris, you just pointed out. There's zero reason for me to run this unless I'm farming tomestones for some reason, and it is very, very late in a patch to be farming tomestones.
Or this is actually the appropriate time to start farming tomestones because it's the only time that matters.
Yeah.
Now, but how do we balance that? How do you do that in terms of matchmaking? Where, like, because I don't know how WoW handled it, but imagine going like, "Yep, I'm going to queue for this," and oh y'all, we're not going to do the side boss that I want, I'm out. Like, how do you in a case of that, the expectation, especially where the game has already trained players, is that this is a race to the end as fast as possible. I'm here to get my tomes. You know, like, for whatever reason, you know, how do we because I think there's two things. A, you have to design the content, and B, you have to change the culture. What do you think, Magic?
I don't think you have to. I mean, you didn't queue up for, if you were going after the optional boss, you typically weren't just randomly queuing up in the dungeon finder, in the duty finder.
Because then you don't get the right dungeon.
Right. One, you may not get the right dungeon. And if you queue specifically
That's true.
for that dungeon, you're queuing for that dungeon for a particular reason. You need a clear or whatever. You would just typically shout or just go with your friends. Hey, we're going to go do Anzu. Who wants to go? So I don't think there's any training that you really need there. It's an optional boss. Has nothing to do with the story, so you're not missing anything. Has the chance to drop a mount or a minion or something stupid that doesn't mean anything in the grand context. You know, it doesn't even drop gear. It doesn't even have to drop gear. So nobody feels butthurt about not getting that extra chance at a piece of gear if they really needed 505s. I don't think there's a training element that needs to go into it. But I just want a little more. I love dungeons, but they all feel the same. They just feel like in a different environment. And actually, this one looks a lot like Heroes Gauntlet. So
you don't have to train anybody because if it's tied behind Blue Mage, it's already Party Finder only content. It's already handled.
Right.
If it's tied to a class quest, you just put it in with the Trust Dungeon, and then you're already queuing into it by yourself. So it's already handled. And then from there, if it's a mount grind, it's a % chance. You need an item you need to guarantee that somebody in the item has the item to attune, or you require everybody to be attuned, or you require everybody to pony up some bicolor gemstones or whatever magical, mystical thing. So that's already going to enter the same mount farming Party Finder style groups that Extremes do. So it's already just going to be handled by the nature of how the community already treats cosmetic content.
I hope that you really enjoyed that highlight, and I hope that you check out the full podcast. Again, link is in the description. Thanks for being here, and hope you have a fantastic day, you wonderful, beautiful individual.